Has the terrorism on Tuesday stopped?
Well, to tell you very precisely, Greta, on Wednesday I talked to several intelligence sources who said, quote, "It's not over." And then David Ensor, our national security correspondent, took it a step further after that, and he talked to his sources who said there are still terrorist cells in this country who may be trying to launch terrorist attacks. So the bottom line, Greta, is it's not over, and it won't be over for a long time.
When you say there are terrorist cells in this country, is there any more information in terms of geography, where they might be, what they might attempt to do? Are we learning anything at all?
What I am trying to piece together is the potential, and I'm still working on this, but it appears clear that there was a concerted effort to insert cells over the past few years into this country. That seems obvious, but it wasn't the normal tit-for-tat sort of terrorism. This was a much more concerted effort. How many? Numbers? I don't know. These people operate in what are called sleeper cells, a lot of them. They go over somewhere else overseas for training, come back here, get additional training, and like the pilots in this whole terrorist act, and then they lead normal lives. And then someone activates them, and they commit their deeds. So, you know, it's a tough thing for the FBI, for the CIA, for any of these people to try to know exactly what they're doing, because it is so closely knit, these particular sleeper cells, and a lot of them don't know each other anyway.
Mike, what about the people who are in custody? What do we know about them?
Well, there are two material witnesses now, one in custody, one not. The one in custody was arrested at Thursday when the airport reopened at JFK. He was on board an aircraft and he was caught with a fake pilot's ID. He wasn't in the cockpit, he was a passenger. And then you see the two people up here on the screen. They are two material, they are not material witnesses, rather. They are two men who were taken off a train in Fort Worth, Texas, one of 25 people now held by the Immigration and Naturalization Service who are being questioned by the FBI. On these two were found box cutters. Now, similar weapons authorities believe were used in the hijacking of the four aircraft.
Is there a certain strategy that the investigators are following in trying to track these people down?
The strategy they have adopted early on is to look to the past to try to figure out what happened this time. Because bin Laden, even though this is a much bigger operation, bin Laden operates pretty consistently in the way he organizes his troops. There is this manual, which we have in our possession, that was introduced in the embassy bombing trials in New York. And they follow that pretty closely in terms of operations, communications, transportation. And so they've gone back to past cases like Khobar Towers, and they've also gone to the USS Cole bombing. And in terms of that, the Cole, they found a connection between a couple of the people, the hijackers in this most recent incident, and the Cole bombing. The CIA apparently had surveillance set up in Kuala Lumpur on a suspect in the Cole bombing. One of the people who was the hijackers who crashed the plane into the Pentagon was seen in that surveillance video. A couple of weeks before Tuesday's incident, the FBI was told by the CIA to be on the lookout for these two, for one guy and his associate. Both of them were on the American Airlines plane that went down, and they opened an investigation. Now, what happened after they opened that investigation, we don't know.
All right, Mike Boettcher, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Almost 5,000 people are unaccounted for in New York. The crushing agony of not knowing what has become of them has paralyzed parents, families, friends, and many Americans. CNN's Candy Crowley introduces us to one man who is living this nightmare.
Yes, Dan? Yes, this is David Vinson.
He's an Eastman Kodak executive from Webster, New York. A man with a problem to solve, a man on a mission.
How is it being set up so that I can make the best use of my time? Because you're working a timeline here. You have to get to your daughter as fast as you can.
Melissa is missing. She's a technology recruiter at Alliance Consulting.
But we know that that's 102nd floor of Tower 1.
The enormity of what's happened in David Vinson's life shows on his face, but does not slow his step.
please take a picture, please focus on the picture, to get her face out there so that
working on 3 hours sleep and a couple of crackers, he protects his fondest hopes, battles his worst fears, and sometimes loses.
I don't have any video of her. To be honest with you, Melissa didn't like to be videoed. She used to holler at me every time I did. I'd give anything to have her holler at me right now.
I'd give anything, he says, to have her holler at me right now. It's a rare lapse. Mostly, there is a desperate monotony to his mission.
I know she made a 911 call at 9:02:07.
It's all that David Vincent knows about what happened to his eldest daughter. It's enough to hang hope on.
When we went back to the cell phone provider, the only thing that we had that they could tell us is that there was a 911 call made from that cell phone at 9:02, which was some 17 minutes after the jet had piled into the thing.
9:02:07. He tells it to everyone he talks to. He clings to it for dear life, because of course it is.
I need to know where she was when she made that call, because that will tell me whether she was downstairs just getting off the path and maybe in a void someplace downstairs, or whether I have to understand that she was upstairs on 102 and have to wonder whether she was able to get out or not able to get out.
By evening, David Vincent has pretty much worn out the corner of 26th and Lexington, and his cell battery is fading, so he moves on. Craig Spitzer is CEO of Alliance. 7 employees, everyone thought to be in the building that morning, are missing. He cannot, will not, bring himself to believe they're gone.
Somewhere in your head, you know they're gone, right?
I'm not going to say that to you right now.
You can't?
No, and I won't. And I won't for myself, and I won't for the people in there.
In there is a room full of people who have loved someone too long to give up so soon, and what's left after hope is unthinkable. It is why they agreed to expose this rawest of human times to the glare of the camera lens, because maybe somebody out there has information about Roland, something that will keep his brother moving.
I go to sleep with hope, I wake up with none.
And perhaps somebody saw Eric in a stairwell racing to safety.
We don't know. Maybe he's out there someplace, got hit on the head, and he doesn't know who he is. You know, maybe he's unconscious and he didn't have any identification on him.
And as it turns out, nobody can say for sure that Melissa was in the office for that 8:30 meeting.
I have to tell you, Craig, that's the best news that I could possibly hear, because what you're telling me is you can't confirm Melissa in that office space, and that's what I had to know. Yeah. That's what keeps me going.
So if you know anything about Melissa, call her father. He'd give anything to hear her holler at him again. Candy Crowley, CNN, New York.
There's no doubt about it. Americans are facing a tremendous challenge. Not just mourning our dead, not just rebuilding our cities and getting on with our lives. There also is the matter attacking global terrorism. Can we do all of that? CNN senior analyst Jeff Greenfield is in New York to remind us we have before.
Yes, Greta, it may be because of our wealth or our exuberant, often raucous culture, our love of material comfort, even our relative youth as a nation, but there is something about America that leads our adversaries over and over again to underestimate our resolve. In fact, sometimes we even underestimate ourselves. Adolf Hitler, for example, was convinced America wouldn't and couldn't defeat Nazi Germany. We were, he thought, a mongrel nation, weakened by different races and religions, and by a decadent popular culture. We could never conquer the racially pure Aryans. We did. When the Soviet Union launched the first satellite in 1957, Americans plunged into self-doubt. Soviet youth were studying physics and rocket science, Life magazine warned. Young Americans were consumed by trivial diversions. Could we withstand this threat, Life asked? We did. The Soviet Union no longer exists. Neither does Life magazine.
In Vienna, Mr. Kennedy confronted his country's major adversary.
In the early 60s, Soviet leader Khrushchev thought President Kennedy weak. Poet Robert Frost reported that Khrushchev had told him America was too liberal to fight. Khrushchev may not have said that, but he acted on that impulse when he put Soviet missiles into Cuba. The U.S. would never challenge that move, he thought. We did.
To halt this offensive buildup, A strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated.
My fellow Americans.
A later generation of Soviet leaders were sure America would not protect Europe with medium-range missiles. We did. And when Japan emerged as an economic superpower in the 1980s, we told ourselves that we were so consumed by short-term thinking, we would never preserve our economic supremacy. We did. And now we have new questions to answer. Can a nation where most of us have known only easy times cope with demands on our comfort, on our safety, on our families that we never imagined we would have to face? If history has the answer, we will. Greta?
In other words, Jeff, are you saying that history has shown that American will can overcome, can trump strategic obstacles?
Indeed, and can trump complacency and can trump the things we're hearing today. Admiral Yamamoto of Japan, after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, said, "I fear we have awakened a sleeping giant." And that is the history of this country, that we can drift into isolationism, we can drift into comfort, we can turn our back on the world. But when the world reminds us that it is here, as it has done in horrifically historic ways this week, the history says America will respond. We're going to be talking about that with Senator McCain and some others later tonight. But the guide from history is pretty encouraging. The question, I suppose, is that I don't believe ever before have we gone through so sustained a period when we have faced really not much of a challenge, when we have been at peace, when we have been prosperous, when a younger generation has really not had very much asked of it. That's the question we have to answer this time around.
What happens to the critics, the dissenters, when that starts to appear on the horizon?
Yeah, see, I think actually that's an encouraging sign. I think the fact that you know, through World War II, for instance, people have this image that we marched in lockstep. There were plenty of political arguments, plenty of criticism of how Roosevelt was running the war. Roosevelt was very worried about the congressional elections of 1942 because there had been setbacks. There was some exercise in black market activity. There were not everybody pitched in, but the fact of the matter is that very kind of dissension, that cantankerousness that's so much a part of America, is actually, I think, a sign of our strength. I actually look forward to the first bit of political bickering that develops, because it shows that we're feeling comfortable enough about who we are to remain Americans. And this is a country where political disagreements are, you'll pardon the expression, as American as apple pie.
You know, it's sort of interesting for me, Jeff. I didn't grow up in World War II, so I never lived through that great generation. I grew up in the Vietnam days, where there was certainly a lot of criticism and dissent, and we certainly had a divided country. Now we have such a national threat that the country seems so united, seems so different.
And I think that is really the difference between the Vietnam generation and even the whole post-war era. Korea was not a war that was fought out of any unity. There was tons of criticism of President Truman at that time because the war was stalemated. I think the difference is that what has happened here in New York and in Washington is so overwhelming that everybody has said it, and I think we started saying it Tuesday, it simply has changed us as a country. And that for once, that's not an overstatement by the media, that's fact.
And when you say it's overwhelming, I mean, it has affected everybody across this country. I had some reservists on last night, one from Milwaukee, one from San Antonio, and one from here in Washington, D.C., ready to go. I mean, it's not just a New York, Washington thing at all. We may find out that we have lost more Americans on this day even than in Antietam, when 7,000, I believe, died. There were 22,000 casualties in 1862. If the country doesn't change because of that, it never will. There's simply, I don't know of any way to measure this, even by history. History almost fails us as a guide. This is so overwhelming an event. As always, thanks to CNN's Jeff Greenfield. CNN's coverage of America's new war continues in a minute with Larry King Live. I'm Greta Van Susteren in Washington, and I will be with you again tomorrow night. We leave you, though, with the haunting sights and sounds of this sad, mournful September day in New York.